Right. Um, Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Namaste. My name is Sreekanth, uh, Principal of Systematic and Strategic Innovation at Innomantra. I would like to welcome you all to the webinar series on innovation, the CXO Forum on Systematic Innovation Management. Today, we have the sixth webinar in the series. This webinar series is a joint initiative of Innomantra and Amplify to introduce and share various aspects of innovation. This forum is designed to bring together leading minds from the industry, academia, and government agencies globally to strengthen innovation methods and reinvent organizations for growth and sustainability. This series provides a roadmap based on the 8 innovation management principles outlined in the recently established series of international standards, ISO 56000. During the past 15 years, innovation management experts from 50 countries have codified the principles of successful innovation initiatives. The result is a comprehensive framework for systematic innovation management aligned with ISO's management system structures, which are adaptable to any organization's innovation needs and requirements. This forum will explore a common understanding of the best practices for innovation management, aligning with the ISO 56000 innovation management system. This provides an opportunity to interact with other leading innovators and develop actionable insights to drive the innovation process. This series will bring out ISO's principles of innovation management to help us assess where you stand as an organization in innovation and thus plan for internal projects to grow your organization. The 8 principles based on the ISO standards will help explore the critical elements of an innovation management system. The community support for this webinar series is provided by the Indian Society for the Quality on the theme Enabling Innovation Success over and over again. Before we get started, I would like to introduce Innomantra and Amplify organization. Innomantra is a leading digital innovation and intellectual property management consulting and services firm headquartered in Bengaluru, India. It works with organizations to design and achieve their digital strategy from idea to implementation. Its signature threefold approach to innovation that looks at overall business strategy, people, and functional systems in a digital ecosystem is globally recognized. Innomantra has a wide range of clients ranging from small to medium businesses to Fortune Global 500 organizations. I'm very happy and delighted to make an announcement. The July-August 2023 edition of the Harvard Business Review featured a cover article titled, How Generative AI Can Augment Human Creativity. This article is co-authored by Innomantra team, Dr. Tojin Thomas Epen, Mr. Lokesh Venkataswamy, along with Dr. Daniel Fingstad and Mr. Joe Falk. This article unfolds the intersection of generative artificial intelligence and human intelligence to think beyond. We hope this insightful feature captures the interest of the HBR readers as an inspiration for innovation. Amplify is a leading consulting and training company headquartered in Stockholm, Sweden. Amplify is rooted in strong Scandinavian innovation culture where innovation is practiced and researched at the forefront. Amplify has worked with multinational clients and contributed to innovation efforts all over the world for the past 20 years. This hands-on experience from innovation projects has contributed to gain deep knowledge to come up with strategic perspectives of innovation. Today's webinar features Dr. Viswanathan Seshan and Mr. Gunnar Storfeldt. We'll plan for a short Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Please do post your questions on the chat window. Would like to introduce Dr. Viswanathan Seshan. Dr. Viswanathan Seshan is a partner and CEO of Viswan Consulting. Dr. Seshan comes with exposure to various industries which a few people could boast of. A degree in instrumentation engineering, a PhD in biomedical engineering, and his extensive experience and certifications in the area of intellectual property rights. He has played various roles in companies like GE, Philips, and Versoni. Dr. Seshan will share a perspective on integrated intellectual asset management, which brings a holistic approach to IP. We are very delighted to have Dr. Seshan to address this into the webinar today. I would like to invite Dr. Viswanathan Seshan to share his thoughts and insights on the topic leading intellectual property management. Over to you, Dr. Seshan.
Thank you, Sreekanth. First, let me share my screen. Please let me know when you can see it.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for the kind words, Sreekanth. And by the way, when I'm sharing it, if I turn on my screen of the gallery, does that reflect on your screen as well? Or do you just see my screen?
It's just your presentation.
Just a presentation. Okay, great. Then I can leave my screen on as this is now. Thank you very much again for the kind words, and thanks to Innomantra and Amplify for giving me this opportunity. Innomantra, I just want to say that Innomantra and I, Viswan Consulting, we are actually collaborating on a number of projects and also plan to continue this collaboration going forward. So this, I think, is a great step in that, one more step in that direction of collaborative work. So thank you, Innomantra, and of course, Amplify as well. If you look at the title, it does not have the word innovation in it, right? But I think all of you realize why intellectual asset or intellectual property management is important from, all of you have been involved in, are involved in innovation, and you know that it's important to have intellectual property to protect it in the right way. But what exactly is integrated intellectual asset management, and why is it important in the light of, say, innovation? Today, well, I can give you actually, why talk of IP asset management? I can give you 8 reasons, and all those 8 you've seen before, and it'll actually warm your hearts because I stole this from Gunnar and Lokesh. These are the reasons why we want to talk of IP asset management. It struck me that as I read each of these titles, it struck me that each of these can actually be exactly applied to IP, rights management, or IP asset management. And that link is so strong that there is no doubt in my mind anymore that IP asset management or IP portfolio management can actually have a very strong bearing and can contribute heavily to the ISO 56000 series, because if you have an IP innovation process that is compliant, and if you have an IP asset management process that is compliant with that IP innovation, the innovation process management, then you have an IP asset management process that is automatically compliant with a standard that could possibly be upcoming in the future. So it seems to me that there is no further doubt that why we need to talk about IP asset management. And I hope you agree with me. What is an intellectual asset? Now, the basic question is, well, it's an intellectual property. It's a specific type of intangible asset. As you know today, many companies, there is news that, a lot of companies have 80% of their assets as intangible assets, or a major share of their assets are intangible and rather than tangible. Intellectual assets are a subset of those intangible assets and are the fruits of creative or innovative labor of your employees. And though it's not entirely correct, intellectual asset is often used interchangeably with intellectual property. But then the question comes up, what is the difference between property and asset? it's really how you look at it. Let's say that you have a house full of paintings, you have 20 paintings, and only one of them is a Picasso. Well, the Picasso is an asset, the rest is your property. Okay, so that gives you an idea. So it's really the economic value that you attach to it. It's not your sentimental value, but really the economic value that makes it an asset in financial terms. The exact same thing applies for intellectual property. You have a huge portfolio, and only a few of those patents in there or a trademark, etc., would be your real assets. But the good thing is that just like you look at the paintings and a house full of paintings and you say, this is my overall, this is my asset, you look at the portfolio itself and say, as a whole, this is my asset, right? And so, but you will have to dive a bit deeper to actually identify the gems in that portfolio. So what are the types of IP assets we're looking at? And this is non-exhaustive. So you have patents, trademarks, designs, copyrights, trade secrets, know-how or knowledge, domain names, and these are things that have been covered in earlier sessions as well, I believe. Of course, this is non-exhaustive because if you go to a farmer, they have farmers' rights. You have geographical indicators like Champagne and Dharwad Peda in India. You have Basmati rice in India. These are all geographical indicators. That's also an IP asset if you have it. You can have mask rights if you're in the semiconductor industry. You can have database rights if you're in the software industry. So this is a non-exhaustive asset, a list of IP assets that you can have. But it's important to keep this in mind as you go through the innovation process. And why is that? So rather than giving you a boring lecture on what the theory is behind IIAM, I actually thought that I would focus on 4 different aspects and approach this in the context of 4 different IP, I would say, processes. One is the IP creation process, the IP licensing process, the IP revaluation process, and the IP valuation process. So it's 4 different processes. I will not go into the processes themselves, but I'll try to cover them from the viewpoint of innovation as well as IP portfolio IP rights creation, and how an IIAM concept adds further value to that portfolio or whatever the process is. So starting with IP creation. It's a very, very high-level picture. So for those of you that are involved in product development, please don't think that I'm belittling your process. This has just 4 steps in it, and it has no real connection to the actual development process. These are very abstract thoughts or level. So you have the technical design, and the way to protect it would be patents, utility models, etc. You come to a final design after a lot of discussion. And then here I've put in patent risk assessments. Now, this is not an IP right it's not an intellectual property right, but it does give you knowledge that creates an asset. It's an asset for you. So that's the reason I've included these assessments in this chart. They're not an IP right. I just want to make clear that that's not an IP right, but it does give you knowledge, and that knowledge forms an asset for the future development of your product. Then you go into the industrial design, where you have a design registration, and that's the look and feel of the product. So if you look at an air fryer, it has a certain shape. If you look at a Coca-Cola bottle, that has a certain shape. Those are industrial designs. And then you have, of course, the product naming. What do you want to call the product? How do you want to position it? And those are trademark registrations. Typically, and I will touch upon this again later, but typically, each of these processes, the first 2 blocks, which is the technical part, the 3rd block, the industrial block, and the product naming, they work in silos. And do they work well? Yeah, they work well. Today, you can see that there are a lot of successful products out there, and they have been designed not using an IIAM approach, but rather a siloed approach, and they work fine. But if they had done a bit more of an IIAM approach, what would it look like? Well, let's take, for example, a simple concept of a design registration. So at the beginning of the project, instead of looking at the technical design, you look at the industrial design and say, I want a certain shape. Now that feedback goes to the technical designers to say, fit your technical design into my form factor, right? Into my specific design of a product. I use a Dell computer with 2 separate 2 USB-C on either side of the computer. One of the reasons I bought this laptop, believe it or not, was because I felt this was very convenient, because I don't want to have one side only where I can charge. All things considered, all things alike, this was a distinguishing feature. This could be a case where the design guy said, look, it would be nice to have each of these 1 port on either side rather than 2 ports on the same side. technical guys, can you design it for me? Put, in your technical design. That created a design that is unique, but also maybe a few patents, because they may have had to reroute a few wire. I don't know anything about the technical design of this product, but maybe there were patents in there, right? So I'm just saying that looking forward and feeding back and taking the IAM approach in IP creation can actually help. And by the way, I started with IP creation. It's actually the hardest one to describe when you look at an to define an IAM approach. But let's see how well I can cover this. So an IP creation strategy should consider all possible protection measures. It's very important that you look at not just all of these, but even copyrights for that matter. So when you do a trademark, are you creating a new picture for these? When you look at, not picture, are you creating a new trademark? How are you going to advertise it? Can you use those advertising material to actually enforce your product? Let's say somebody brings out a counterfeit on Amazon. It's not that easy to go after them with a trademark, because sometimes you have to prove that you own the trademark, that it's in use, et cetera, et cetera. But a copyright is far easier to enforce. Do you have that factored in where you have a registered copyright at the beginning? Otherwise, you are going to delay it because you need to register it before you can assert it. So that's what I mean by considering all possible protection measures in your product development cycle. And this is a simple example of that, whether you go with patents or with designs or with utility models or all of them, some of them. Do you consider product branding and trademarking, over a period of the lifetime of this product? The only thing that casts I would say on a little bit of a negative side is the use of open source software. That can have a huge adverse impact on your IP assets, because open source software, people believe in, especially the technical people, tend to believe that OSS is freeware. It is free in the sense that it's free of money, but it's not free of obligations. And in some cases, and especially in certain licensing types called copyleft licenses, you have the obligation to either sometimes even give back your software for free. So in other words, if you were to incorporate a freeware library into your proprietary software, the risk that you may not even be able to sell it, but may have to give it away for free exists. There are IP licenses or licensing regimes in open source software where they actually give a patent license that is clubbed with your software. In other words, if you incorporate a open source software into your product, into your software product, and if you have a patent that reads on that particular feature, unfortunately, you not only have to give away the software for free, but you also give a patent license for free. So all your investments and innovation has gone to waste. I just want to highlight that because that is an impact that people don't think about and really needs to be considered when you're looking at, especially an IAM approach to IP creation. Moving gears now and making my life a bit easier, I move into IP licensing. The concept of IP licensing is very simple. You have a patent, you have a design, you have a trademark, whatever it is. You go to somebody and say, here, would you like to have a license? That's a carrot license, and they may take it. If they're infringing, you go to them and say, I will threaten you with a lawsuit. You have to take a license. So that's the concept of IP licensing. But IP, as I said, is not just one entity. You can have technologies, you can have patents, and various different things. Typically, you would not license a design. It's unlikely unless it's a brand licensing. But let's go with the first one, technology licensing. It's one of the simplest ways to license something where you have a technology that you've developed. You go to a third party that you want them to manufacture for you, and you say, here is a license to a technology. You can develop it, you can manufacture it and maybe sell it back to me. I'll buy it from you, brand it, and sell it. That's a concept of technology license. There could also be technologies that you're not using anymore that you want somebody else to market, and you can get some money out of it with a license. You could also bundle that, or you could actually, second aspect would be a patent license. Let's say you have a patent, just go to them and say, here is the patent, would you like to manufacture this, or make it, use it, whatever, and they could take a license for you from that patent. But there could be instances where you give a technology license to somebody together with a patent license, or you give a patent license, they may not be able to implement it themselves. They need the technology behind it and some help from you. And there are cases where companies cannot do that, because the person that knew what to do with that patent and the technology has left that company. In other words, that knowledge was not captured. So here, hidden in these two sentences is a knowledge management opportunity that was not taken, that was not captured. You can have a technical note, captured it, but then nobody knows how to read it, nobody knows where to find it. It's again useless. So I'm talking about a situation where there are licensing opportunities that could be lost because you didn't have a holistic picture of all the technology, all the license, all the patents, all the knowledge, and so on. A great example of IIAM is actually brand licensing. Companies like Philips, GE, Siemens, even Montblanc for that matter, have brand licenses where they go to a company and say, here, manufacture this for us, put our name on it and you can sell it. But we will monitor your product because it goes out as our product, right? There, you give them technology, you give them patents, you give them your brand. But in addition to that, you also actually monitor their processes. So you actually teach them how to make these products like you would do it yourself. So a lot of trade secrets are also given with this particular type of license. Not always, but many times. Again, if you don't know what is in there, you cannot do that. And it looks very bad when you have given them, and of course, if you have given them, everything else except the trade secrets, without telling them it's a trade secret, without telling them it's confidential, they could use it, you could lose your trade secrets. And so it's really important for you to also know what you're giving them, for which you need to have this concept of IIAM right from the very beginning. And I've just put in examples of bundled licensing, like technology and patents and designs, et cetera, et cetera. A concrete example of that was something that we worked on in, when I was in one of my early days for camera-based monitoring, where you had a camera that would look at a patient's face and tell you the blood pressure, the skin color, and so on. And the interesting part was that there was a discussion about actually, of course, it was patents, of course, it was technology, but the question was, can we actually sell this with a brand, with not a brand in terms of Philips or GE or Siemens, but like the Intel Inside logo or maybe a Dolby logo, something that says, if you use this logo, you are using my technology, my patents. It's the easiest way to license something because you get money for it. And it becomes a de facto standard, hopefully, in the future. It's so people, when they put Dolby, that it's a standard, and that they're using a certain type of technology. There is reliability in the technology. And we were trying to look into that. And that was something that I thought, fitted in very well with this kind of IIAM concept in licensing. Moving gears again, IP valuation. You cannot have a good license unless you know what the value of your patent is, and that's the link between these two sections. If you look at IP valuation, there is an obvious link to licensing, but really IP valuation is much broader scope. As a CEO, and I guess many of you are CEOs, CTOs, CFOs, I've been asked this question when I go to them, when I present my big portfolio picture, and then they say, well, what's in it for me? Why am I giving you $1 million or 2 or 10 million for maintaining a portfolio? What do I get in return, right? It's not easy to explain that. If you look at the 4 models that I put on the top, right, on the right side, certain things are easy to explain, like the commercial model, because I get licensing revenue and I can say I get X million dollars a year, that's my value. But how about the one right below that called the risk mitigation model? That's where you have a cross license with another company. How do you describe that in value to a CEO or a CFO? What is the value of a cross license? Even worse, to the right bottom, a defensive model. It's often, you can draw a visual parallel. You've seen these high walls across, around big institutions with those spikes that come out of it. The defensive model is exactly that. It has no value unless somebody tries to breach it and it withstands that assault. But by itself, it may not have that much value, but you still need to maintain it because it's a few hundred, few thousand patents or trademarks or designs. That value actually on its own is not high, but as a combined portfolio, it can have a large value. One of the easy ones is, of course, the exclusivity model on the top right, which is what's called a premium profit model. you protect a feature or a product or even a market where other people cannot practice. And as a result, you can command a premium for your product or feature or in the market. And that contribution, that extra value that you get is the value of your exclusivity model and the patterns that you use or the designs you use for that particular product feature in the market. When you look at defensive portfolio, for example, and let's say that you have a beautiful design, and this typically happens in low-tech products, say a shaver, but that's not really low-tech, but let's take an air fryer, for example, or a cooling fan, for example. The patterns are typically defensive in nature because if a blade is angled at 22.5 versus 23.7, it doesn't really matter to you as a purchaser. It might increase efficiency, maybe reduce power consumption and so on, but doesn't matter to you as a purchaser. And so what is the value of that particular pattern that reads on that? Well, it's not really just a pattern, but the design is so unique, so iconic, that is where the real value is. And by the way, we do have patents that protect it as well. That's how you would sell that particular defensive portfolio. By itself, or as of itself, it may not have much value, but when bundled, it can add value. And therefore, it is really essential to know each asset's value. What is the value of a trademark? What is the value of a particular design or a particular patent? And there are ways to calculate that. Of course, what is the value of a brand? It can be huge. I think Philips is like 8 billion, 9 billion. Apple must be, I don't know, maybe 1 trillion. But that's an intellectual property, also an asset. And it can skew the whole valuation. So for most valuation of IP, I would say set the brand value aside and look at the rest of your portfolio. Because if you try to compare the value of your brand, a big brand, with the rest of your IP assets, I think the conclusion would be, I don't need those assets anymore because the brand is everything. But that's not entirely true. So when you do the valuation, don't take IIAM to a ridiculous level where you take the brand in as well, set that aside, and then look at the value of the rest of your assets, because it is also important for you to sometimes maybe, as an IP department, you may have to justify your existence. You may have to justify the existence of your maintenance of the IP portfolio. And you can actually convince, and we have done this, where you take this whole holistic view of your IP portfolio, your IP assets, and you make a picture to the CFO who says, oh, I see the value now. It has happened. And of course, bundled IP can increase valuation, as I said earlier, with in light of the IP licensing chapter. And finally comes the IP reevaluation methodology or the process, which actually is a periodic process of reassessing the value of your IP assets. It's crucial to do this for multiple reasons. The most easiest, most relevant one would be financial, because if you don't reassess it, you could actually end up paying for things that you're not using anymore. Actually, most companies have this process, but they are mostly, again, parallel, disjointed processes for IP reevaluation. Because the process needs expertise both in depth and in breadth, and that breadth is what is usually not brought in. To give you examples of this, let us say that you are selling a product, all the patents have expired, you don't have any protection anymore. So you say, okay, I'm going to, or you decide to stop selling the product and you don't need those patents anymore. You sell the patent portfolio, or you abandon it completely, you save a lot of money, everybody's happy. But what about the design portfolio that actually read on the same products? Did you even know that such a design portfolio existed? What do you do with it? On the other hand, marketing decides, another example, marketing decides, okay, we're not going to sell this product in this market anymore. We stop it completely. So a trademark is not useful. We can get rid of the trademark, save some money. Well, do they know, or do you know as an IP department, what patents have been protected? What rights do you have in that particular jurisdiction? Do you need to keep it? Some jurisdictions can be very expensive, like the UAE, for example. And if you even keep it for 1 or 2 years, you can save a lot of money by just saying, I don't want those patents anymore because I don't sell in that product, in that jurisdiction anymore. On the flip side, let's say that you decide that you don't want to sell this product anymore, And all of a sudden, the design guys jump in and say, okay, let's kill this. All the designs also we throw away together with the patents. Hold on, not a good idea sometimes, because if you get rid of your design, somebody else can copy that design. And even without putting the name of your company on that product, people will associate it in their mind with your company, with your quality, and you could end up losing market share. So do you really want to get rid of the design portfolio? These are the questions that people should ask. And it's very difficult. And to give you an example would be, the Coca-Cola bottle. If they let go of that design, you and I can make it and fill it with any brown liquid, and people would buy it thinking it's Coca-Cola, right? And it doesn't have to be brown. It can be anything, but the shape was so iconic. The three-headed shaver of Philips. Anybody, if you let go of the design, people can make it. Unfortunately, design protection does have certain limitations in time. So you need to look at trademarking of that for extended protection, but that's an IP matter, a detail which we will not cover here. My point is that you need to have a holistic view of all your intellectual assets to be able to do your revaluation properly and, more importantly, meaningfully, right? And of course, it could throw up great licensing or sale opportunities. And as I said earlier, just selling a patent or licensing a patent has less value than licensing a patent plus a design plus something else. My last section would be the requirements. I just thought I would close with this. And what is needed for successful integrated intellectual asset management? Of course, you need a good strategy. I think that has been clear in all the slides and all the stuff that I said earlier. You need good policies within your organization for creation, revaluation, licensing, abandonment, policies to use open source, defense of publications, managing of trade secrets, knowledge management. You really need good policies, and you need people to adhere to these policies. So an audit also required for making sure that people comply. Tools, extremely important, whether they're separate tools or a consolidated tool, but tools talking to each other, tools flagging you at the right moment, that helps you with portfolio management, valuation, monitoring, operations, management of the entire portfolio, and so on. People, it's really a culture shift to look at it from a holistic perspective. Patent people need to understand that trademarks are important. Trademark people need to understand that patents are important and that they're equally important. Neither thinks that they're more important than the other. And that culture is important. So it's really a culture change. And as you can imagine, it's very important for people to be taught, to be educated. Targets, I think it's the mainstay of all businesses. You need to set targets, whether you say it's financial, number of IP rights, what products are covered, markets are covered, whether you use your IP or license it. Typically, a big company with a large portfolio may end up using only 20 to 30% of their own portfolio, et cetera, et cetera. And the metrics, obviously, the next step to targets, how do you measure your targets, and feedback to strategy, tools, and policies. And so with that, I think I've come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much, and I hope you got something out of it.
Thank you, Dr. Seshan, for a very short and crisp overview and awareness regarding intellectual property. So from my perspective, first, I did understand a difference between the intellectual asset and the property, I should say. I'm not in this field. And it's very interesting about the examples and the concepts that you brought about, including the open software, source software awareness aspect of it. I don't know. I mean, I'm not talking about bigger organizations. I do work with a lot of startup organizations. The awareness of this perspective is not there, or even the know-how of what happens. And I think the beautifully you were able to put together the IP creation, licensing, valuation, revaluation concepts to give as you mentioned, a holistic perspective and the strategy that needs to be part of managing and at some point of time safeguarding the assets that they have in the organizations. And being an expert in this space, I know that you're able to see it when you talk to organizations and other companies. And I think it's so valuable that I'm able to see now the importance of the IP strategy and how we are able to include that as part of an organization, small or large or startup. And I think a lot of startup organizations do need this sort of a support system for them as well. So thank you, Dr.
Indeed, you're welcome. My pleasure.
Any questions for Dr. Seshan before we move forward? I think I'll go ahead with the next discussion as well, and then any questions we'll be able to address at the end of the session. The next speaker for today is Mr. Gunnar Storfeldt. Mr. Gunnar is an innovation management expert and CEO and co-founder of Amplify. He's also the co-founder of the Association of Innovation Management Professionals in Sweden. He comes with extensive experience managing radical innovation initiatives in various sectors. In his illustrious career, he had held various roles, including the role of Vice President of Global Business Development for Ericsson Microsoft Mobile Venture. I would like to invite Mr. Gunnar Storfeldt to share his insight on IP management in relation to the innovation management in accordance with the ISO 56000 standard. Over to you, Mr. Gunnar.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Sri, and thank you, Nathan, for an extensive and very interesting presentation. I'm humbled over your knowledge and experience when it comes to this subject. I will talk about IP management purely from a perspective of the ISO 56000 series of standards. And a lot of the things that I will be mentioning, Nathan has already talked about. But let's dive into it. And I will actually begin by talking about standardization of innovation management in general, just to set the scene. And I will go through the 8 innovation management principles one by one, really briefly, for all of you to see them and understand them. So we have a global trend. It's a growing global trend to standardize innovation management, and the reason is that organizations would like to boost their innovation performance by systemizing their innovation efforts. It's very clear, a very clear trend. Organizations have tried different methods before, more ad hoc, not so kind of systematic and professional approaches to innovation management, but now we see really the kind of professional and systematic trend. Some examples of that, for example, in Japan, prominent organizations such as Olympus, Sony, Oki, TDK, and Hitachi, they are all running programs, innovation management programs, to implement innovation management systems according to the ISO 56000 series of standards. And some of them are actually aiming towards getting a certification according to the forthcoming ISO 56001 requirements standards. More about that towards the end of my talk. And in China, we are currently involved in educating and training hundreds and hundreds, actually, of innovation management professionals on the new standards and systems approach. And the final example in my home country, Sweden, it's crucial to comply with the ISO 56000 series of standards if you would like to sell services into the public sector. So that's a growing requirement in procurement. Right. So, but what are these then? These standards why are they so important? Well, they can be essential to your innovation endeavors and increase the success rates. And they are a compelling framework. They're not so much a recipe for how to innovate. That would be counterproductive, actually. But it's kind of the definitions and frameworks that you can use to align your innovation efforts, increase the effectiveness of your work, and boost your innovation performance over time by creating the best possible conditions for innovators and teams. It's as Sri mentioned, it's an effort over 15 years to create and develop these standards. It's a collaboration between international collaboration between innovation management experts in over 50 countries. So it's actually codifying the success factors of innovation management. Now, when we started to develop these standards, we said that we need a set of essential kind of principles that define the discipline of innovation management. And it started out with a long list of prospects, candidates, and it boiled down over the years. It has boiled down to 8 essential principles. And I'll just briefly go through. Nathan has already shown us them as an overview. I'll just briefly go through each one of them to give you a bit more knowledge about what they are all about. So the first one would be kind of maybe obvious, and you might say rudimentary, but often forgotten. The kind of sole purpose of innovation efforts is to create realize value, a novel value. So you have to keep that in mind from the very beginning of your innovation efforts to the end. It might seem obvious, but often forgotten, as I said. And successful innovations are often based on deep insights. It could be about user behaviors, for example, or emerging technologies or rising trends, a lot of different insights that will open the opportunities for you. But insights, new knowledge will often come with more questions and uncertainty. So you have to be good at managing uncertainty. That's a requirement on everyone involved, from innovators to the leaders. And speaking about the leaders, the standard also outlines the principles of future-focused leadership. Managing uncertainty is one of the critical skills of a future-focused leader. And another one would be to point out the strategic direction for your innovation efforts. And be able to take strategic decisions based on assumptions rather than facts. The strategic direction for innovation is kind of aiming your efforts towards the opportunities that you believe are the most important ones. Now, it might be speculative, but you have limited resources, so you have to aim your efforts towards, for a certain period of time, towards a certain number of areas of opportunities. To increase the likelihood of being successful in implementing your strategy. And with that, also, you need to build the right kind of attitudes and behaviors, promoting innovation activities in your organization, and then developing your culture to support the implementation of your innovation strategy and the innovation efforts that you undertake. Now, all the strategies, structures, and cultures must be highly adaptable. It's an uncertain journey you're embarking on, so you have to adapt and adjust as you move along and learn. So that's a critical aspect of driving innovation activities, and also, of course, external factors change all the time, different circumstances, often complex and dynamic situations that you need to deal with. And then finally, the final innovation management principle, the systems approach, is essential to keep everything together, avoid fragmentation, sub-optimization, short-termism, key person dependency, and other impeding factors. So those are the 8 innovation management principles, and they all act on an innovation management system. And the system has 7 interrelated components to it. And we'll actually talk about IP from the perspective of those 7 components. So that's the kind of the background, setting the scene, the standardization, the 8 innovation management principles, and the innovation management system according to the ISO 56000 series of standards. So we'll open up for questions after my talk here. Now into today's subject, innovation and IP management. Right. So Nathan outlined the reasons for IP management and strong kind of systematic and holistic IP management within the domain of innovation management. And the reason is simple, because innovation initiatives often result in things that you would like to protect, and you would like to exploit those IP assets you create and those IP rights. So they will bring significant opportunities. So that's kind of the positive side of it. But also you would like to make sure that you're not ignoring other organizations and people's IP rights, which can result in negative effects such as financial liability or limited freedom of operations and so forth. So what we can conclude, and Nathan already spoke about that, IP management and innovation management is deeply intertwined. And to address this within the standards, there is actually a substandard to the ISO 56000 overarching kind of standard, which is called ISO 56005 Tools and Methods for Intellectual Property Management. And even if that's a substandard, I would argue that it's influencing a lot of the different standards, including the overarching 56000 and the main kind of component, ISO 56002, outlining the innovation management system. For example, also the substandard related to innovation partnerships, IP management will be crucial. So what do the standard actually talk about when it comes to IP management? Well, in relation to the innovation management system, it tells us it's, I would say, a quite rudimentary checklist. And it might need maybe even some support from you, Nathan, when it comes to developing the standard further and having a more holistic view on it. But it's a rough list of things you need to consider when innovating and making sure that you can take care of the challenges and opportunities related to IP management. So from an innovation management system perspective, it tells us that we should scan the external context for opportunities and challenges related to IP management. So it might be anything from finding gaps out there that might be opportunities to us. That would be gaps in IP, so white spots, if you like. And we need to also scan the external context for the IP assets that we might have. We might have to analyze that, how these assets are managed and utilized, and how we can utilize them in our innovation initiatives. That requires us to shape an IP strategy aligned with the innovation strategy that we have. For example, what kind of focus areas of opportunities are we pursuing, and what are the IP aspects of those focus areas of opportunities? And of course, it needs to be aligned with the overall business objectives of the organization or the objectives of collaborating organizations. So that would be an important aspect. This standard also tells us that we need to continuously evaluate and reevaluate our IP assets to make sure that we can utilize them in the best possible way. And the purpose would be to maximize our innovation performance. And finally, then also looking at the core of the innovation management system, the processes taking us from an intent to create something new to value actually being realized. we have to consider both the possible opportunities, IP opportunities, but also the risks associated with those innovation initiatives. And risk might be losing opportunities, or maybe infringing other parties' rights. So digging just a bit deeper into the processes, the kind of the journey from intent to value, the standards outlines for each step of that process. And this is now a very generic process, outlined in the standards, beginning with identifying the opportunities, creating concepts, validating concept, developing solutions, and deploying solutions. So what do we have to do in each of those phases or sub processes of the innovation journey from intent to value? Let's go quickly through each one of them and to get an overview of what the standard is talking about and guiding us, how it's guiding us. And this is not the exhausted list. There are many things the standard lists, and you can use it as a checklist. But in identifying opportunities, it tells us that we need to have a good understanding of the IP landscape, and making sure that we understand the landscape externally and internally. To understand the state of art when it comes to IP rights, who has the kind of the most prominent rights, and what implications does it have to our innovation efforts, and also what kind of assets do we have that we can utilize in the process in identifying opportunities. So important is to be able to assess and identify the IP assets and possibly the white spots, the gaps for exploring innovation opportunities and defining those opportunities, and prioritize based on IP, not only on other criteria and factors. The next step would be creating concepts. So now we have identified some opportunities. We have some strong insights about, for example, needs or new technology possibilities. So now we have to generate ideas, and around the most promising ideas, we can create concepts, and those concepts must be created based on from an IP management perspective. So considering the IP risks relevant to the created concepts, prioritize viable concepts based on an IP perspective, not only features and functions and user values and so forth. Assess the potential of concepts, and understand what we should protect and what we should not protect. And now I think Nathan's holistic view really kicks in, and becomes very important to us. Validate concepts. Concepts are based on a lot of assumptions, so we need to validate. We need to do it in a hypothesis-driven way, and that could apply to IP management as well. So we need to validate the concepts based on the IP assets they can generate, based on the IP risks, and understanding the potential and costs for maybe obtaining rights to be able to realize our concepts. And finally, then also identify the opportunities for licensing in or licensing out those opportunities that the concepts bring. Then we move into, now we have some strong concepts, validated concepts on the table. We have to decide whether to develop those into working solutions. And in that process, of course, we need to look at the development from an IP perspective, and also then making sure that we can update our strategies depending on what we've seen and learned. Maybe updating and populating with our portfolios with new IP assets, And of course, we need to agree with our partners, suppliers, and other interested parties on how to use the IP assets and rights. And then finally, when we deploy, produce and deploy our solutions, we need to make sure that we can maximize the IP assets and rights that we have and minimize the risks, of course, basically to optimize the inventory and portfolio of assets. And maybe also identify when things are now out on the market, we can maybe reassess and then identify new IP opportunities for future innovation initiatives. So this is what the standard talks about in the 5 innovation processes, the phases of the journey from intent to value. Now, the standard also emphasize the importance of considering the positive aspects and the negative aspects. And I think Nathan outlined it very well and a bit more in detail in his 2x2 matrix. There could be defensive actions you can take, or use it for bringing a market forward. And one example of that could be Tesla's decision early on to not file lawsuits against anyone who in good faith would use their technology to develop electrical vehicles. So it could be an essential step, and some experts agree that it is an essential step for innovating in this sector. The patents that they opened were specifically related to the electric powertrain of the vehicles and the fast charging. So basically open up for people to contribute and to help out in accelerating the innovation and the shift into sustainable transportation. So this is what the standards, this 56,000 series of standards covers, and specifically the 56,005 standard on tools and methods for intellectual property management. Before we open up for questions, I just want to mention, I said that we have a forthcoming standard, ISO 56001, as part of the suite. And it's actually a requirement standard which enables organizations to certify themselves as and their innovation management capabilities. And that is due to be published in a year's time, approximately. And if you would like to get ready for that and learn, Innomantra and Amplify has an excellent training program. It's an online, self-paced program with 14 different training modules covering all the aspects of innovation management. So you can make a deep dive into that and understand how you can utilize the innovation management standards and the definitions and frameworks and language within those. Each module has 10 to 12 short lessons, original material, videos, interactive diagrams, tools, knowledge tests, and other key resources. It's a strong learning experience. So right, thanks, and let's move to Sri and for the final kind of questions and answers.
Thank you, Gunnar. Very refreshing perspectives to things. This past hour has been a good consolidation of various levels of abstraction in terms of an organizational strategy, moving specifically onto the intellectual property right perspective and the strategy around it, and also being able to connect them beautifully on an ISO certification context, the standards that's coming up. When you're talking about the exploiting customers' insights, I would like to connect to the example that Dr. Seshan mentioned about probably developing a fan with a different angle or with a different length in terms of when it's getting created by the designing team to the aspects of how it's getting delivered to the customer. Customer insights are important as part of the organization product development, but the customer may not be aware of all the aspects involved with it. But as an organization and a strategy we put together, I think this is played out beautifully, able to connect the dots from various aspects. And also your approach in terms of strategies and culture of the organization and connecting to systems thinking perspective as how it brings out the value of the product and solutions. And you also brought out beautifully the 5-step innovation process for IP. So I think it sits beautifully on one top of the other. And I just figured out I have a lot more to learn from this topic from both of you. And it's very interesting. So thank you very much, Gunnar. Thank you, and Dr. Seshan. I do have a few questions here. Thank you. So this is both of you from Rakesh Babu. So how does ISO 56000 support organizations in navigating the dynamic balance between robust intellectual property protection and fostering open innovation amid rapid technological evolution, in today's landscape? Any of you? Yeah.
Right. So specifically talking about how the ISO 56000 series of standards covers the aspect of open innovation and the IP challenges and opportunities that comes with that. So I'll just begin from an ISO 56000 series of standards then, and Nathan, maybe you could complement with more general aspects on opening up. So the standard talks in general terms about, and this is a combination of the standard I now mentioned, ISO 56005, tools and methods for intellectual property, and 56003, tools and methods for innovation partnerships, which includes then collaborations in different forms, everything from internal collaboration between units within an organization and then opening up for everyone out there to contribute. So it talks in very much general terms on the fact that you must deal with whatever challenges in terms of IP that comes up, depending on your collaboration setup. But it doesn't give you any details on how to, for example, contract externally when you're opening up, or protecting specifically how you should protect. And it doesn't really, it lists the different possibilities you have, different IP types that you can use, but it doesn't give you a direct recommendations for how to deal with each and every situation you might end up in. So it's a very, very rough and overarching framework telling you what you need to consider these things, but not telling you exactly how. So that's how the ISO 56000 series of standards deals with it. Now, over to you, Nathan.
That's the reason why, and I think that gives a very nice overview of how the standards bodies will look at these kinds of matters and how they address them, for a simple reason that they're not going to be prescriptive. The standards are not going to be prescriptive, at least in these kinds of, in these kinds of standards. They're only going to be guidelines at a very abstract level, and then you have to decide how you want to implement it in your particular organization or in your country, for that matter. It could be different for the same organization in different countries. And by the way, to answer this question, I don't think open innovation and intellectual property protection are at odds with each other. They can also work synergistically. I know that when we talk of IP protection, it usually means we protect it for our own use and we stop others from using it and so on. But that need not always be the case. So let's take an example of where, a concrete example of the Philips, long time ago, they came out with something called maybe they acquired it. I think it's called the smokeless chula, or the smokeless stove. It was a little fan that was stuck at the bottom of a coal burning device. And it basically ensured that all the stuff that was in there was burned and that there would be no smoke. And why did they do this? It was only to ensure that there's a lot of smoke-related, asphyxiation-related or smoke-related lung problems that women in India were facing because they used to labor over a wooden stove for hours per day. When Philips decided not to sell the product anymore, I don't even know how much they sold, but the patent was never really, it was maintained, not because it had any value, but it was allowed, people were allowed to do it, but the patent was retained as a way to enforce it in case somebody decided to con the system and come out with a stove that was not fully, safe. And in fact, I think it helped open innovation because people that were doing the right thing and contributing in a meaningful way were never really going to be attacked. The same thing, as you said, Gunnar, about the Tesla, opening up their patents. If somebody were to abuse that technology and come out with unsafe stuff, Tesla could go after them. So they retain the right to do it, but it is fostering open innovation. So patents can actually be used to foster open innovation. Copyleft is a great example. Copyright and copyleft. Copyleft is a type of copyright that takes away the protection and gives free rights to other people. It's actually a great way, and it's a fascinating way of developing and twisting that entire concept around on its head, which actually gives people the right to protect themselves and yet foster open innovation. So they're not really at odds with each other. Now comes the question of addressing the question of where it is at odds with each other. And there, as Gunnar rightly pointed out, contractual terms and conditions have to be put in place. You can look at joint ownership of IP. So just the people that are in the group, they share the IP. Maybe if you bring in more money, you get more rights. If they bring in more effort, they bring more rights, whatever. Those are things that you decide on the spot, as part of a negotiation process. You could also have a situation where you have a standards pool. You create a standard, say communication standard. People come up with patents or technologies that can be part of that standard. It is assessed by an independent authority, included in that standard. It does not mean that it is hindering open innovation, but it does have that open innovation has to adhere to a certain framework. And there are many industry bodies that do that, like the Open Innovation Network, for example. They don't consider patent protection as being against open innovation. In fact, you can actually use IP protection to further open innovation in a good way.
Very nice, very nicely said. I think it's a beautiful. Didn't realize about the copyrights and the copyleft, and how that it could be interpreted and implemented as well. Thank you very much, Dr. Seshan and Dr. Gunnar. A few more questions here on the chat. Again, on ISO 56000, how do you perceive the ISO 56000 in comparison to the existing standards? And what distinctive features or advancements does it bring to the forefront for the C-suite executives in guiding their organizations through effective IP management strategies?
First of all, the relation, the ISO 56000 series of standards in relation to other standards, was that the first part of the question?
The existing ones, yes, of course.
Existing ones could be, for example, then ISO 9000 series, 26,000 on sustainability, and so forth. Well, first of all, what do they have in common? They have the ISO framework, so they use the same structure, they use the same language, definitions are aligned. And you can make the distinction between the different disciplines. So that's kind of a benefit. And you can decide as an organization if you would like to, for example, combine ISO 9000 with ISO 56000. So one is geared towards reliability and quality, and the other one is more opening up, diverging instead of converging. and finding new ways forward, basically deviating from what is kind of the norm and business as usual. But they actually can complement each other, and you can look at these standards and say, well, in our strategy, and how do we combine these frameworks, and not risking us to sub-optimize. One part of the business is really into quality and dependability and predictability. And another one would be into finding new ways forward, breaking norms, and even breaking the rules. And that might contradict each other. You can look at that and say, how do we take the best pieces of both worlds, make sure that we can be effective and efficient and reliable, but at the same time, opening up for new things. So that's one kind of benefit, and that's the C-suite. The C-suite needs to take those decisions. So they need to be aware of the standards and the frameworks. And these frameworks are used as guides. They're not prescriptive, but guides that you can use to not forget important aspects. For example, the innovation management principles. And I've forgotten the final part of the question.
I think the final part was in terms of the C-suite executives being able to guide the organizations with an IP strategy as well. Yes, I think that's sort of covered that aspect as well.
Maybe we're comfortable, expanding on that part of the question.
Sri?
No, what I was saying was I think Gunnar sort of touched base on it, but the final part of the question is that how do the C-suite executives, incorporate that through their effective IP management itself? Yeah, they're using the standards, I should say.
Yeah, I think, well, I can only answer it in a very general sense, and of course from my personal experience. But C-suite executives need convincing that IP has value. When things are going well, I don't think they have any questions. But when there is a financial crunch, one of the first things they look at to optimize is your IP portfolio. The next would be the innovation and R&D, because these are things that don't have immediate impact, right? The CXO, the C-suite looks at money, looks at, for a big business or small business, they look at very short-term gains. And IP typically leads, say, innovation or market by 4 or 5 years, because you need to have protection in place before the products hit the market. R&D, unless you're doing a improvement, you're looking at something that is probably going to be in the market 2 or 3 years down the road, which they believe that they can park for the time being with very little impact, deleterious impact on the future. And I think something like this, where you have a guide that tells them how to look at IP, how to value IP, and what is the value of it today, I think will help convince them that this is not where you run with the axe the minute somebody says cut cost. I think I've seen it many times where it's something that you cannot blame them for, because they need to get quick, low-hanging fruit out of the way so that they can save some cost, and this seems to be an easy way to do it. And if you look at the amount of money that people spend on IP, yeah, it's an even more attractive target. I hope that answers the question to some extent. I maybe didn't completely answer it, but I hope it answers it to some extent.
Yes, it does. Thank you. Thank you. Moving on to the next question here. This is for Dr. Seshan. In the increasingly digital and interconnected world, leaders are concerned about safeguarding their IP from cyber threats. If you could share your perspective on how leaders must put systems to protect IP from inside out perspectives.
Okay, this is a tough one, but thanks, Lokesh. I think it's something that is really thought-provoking. To have a cyber threat, I would think that that particular intellectual property has to be something that is not registered yet, or will never be registered, because if it's a patent, it'll be published, right? If it's a trademark, it's out there for everybody to see. It's copyright, pictures, videos, ads, those are all for people to see. It's available. when you say a cyber threat that can attack IP, it can be an invention disclosure or an innovation that is new, is still under development, but it's somewhere floating around in their computer space. It could also be a trade secret that has been captured and very carefully stored, but obviously hackers can get into it and then you lose everything. So in order to do that, I mean, it really depends. If you take trade secrets, for example, I am 100% sure that Coca-Cola does not save its recipe online. I've been told that it is in some triple sealed cover in a triple safe somewhere with a triple lock combination that only two people need to combine and come together in the same room, et cetera, to access. You don't put it online. It's as simple as that, right? If it is that important, if it is important for the survival of your company. Now, there are cases where it's not possible. So let's say you have an MR design, a magnetic resonance imaging system that's being designed. You have to work across the continents of people in China, India, Japan. In the East, you have Asia, you have people in the US, you have people in Europe, all working together. It's very difficult, really, to stop people from putting it on. I mean, it's not difficult. It's impossible to not have these things online. That's when you get exposed to cyber threats. I think it's really an IT problem, not really an IP problem. So you really need to have, really robust firewalls, monitoring systems. And from the IP side, at least, you need to have people that know what they're doing, and they don't go about after a drink. They don't talk about what they're developing to their friends and colleagues. They don't boast about their achievements in a certain field, say, for example, or, reveal things that they're doing internally. But having said all of this, I think from an IP standpoint, I think it's going to be very difficult to protect yourself from cyber threats without IT support, normal IT support. Having said that, maybe it's also good to bring in a positive element to it, which is to say that you need to know, for example, what IP of yours is being abused or stolen. And for that, again, you need to be monitoring the world outside to see if your pictures are showing up on Amazon in, say, some part of the world, or if your ads are being used. In fact, we have had cases where Philips ads were used, but the name was changed to somebody else, some other company name. There was an ad where somebody was shaving, and you could actually see it was from our Marcom communications database, where it was a very nice, different shaver that was put into the hand, so beautifully done, that I think it merited a copyright in itself, but unfortunately, they infringed our copyright. So, as long as so I think that's where the IP management system kicks in to know what it is that you're losing, because without that, you wouldn't be able to protect yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Seshan. I think we need to have our own perspective, a mental model looking from the views of the intellectual property perspective as we look at the various aspects in life, I think. Not looked at it that way yet. Thank you. I think the final question again, the closed is for both of you, Gunnar and Dr. Seshan. Closed innovation, which has an IP, and an open innovation can possibly be compared with playing soccer versus golf. What is the message to leaders and organizations to look at IP as investment than cost?
Would you like to begin that one, Nathan?
Sure, I can do that. I will steer clear of the soccer versus golf analogy because I'm not sure I understand it. And in fact, I would be interested to know what exactly the analogy pertains to, because I'm sure we can use it in future discussions. It sounds very interesting. But I will jump straight to the second part of the question, the actual question, which is, what is your message to leaders and organizations to look at IP as an investment? I think I covered that, both of us covered that a couple of times, where you look at the valuation. I think the best way this can happen, and I know that this is going to create a lot of, create a lot of angst, maybe even opposition from a lot of people, is to actually have a way to get IP into your books. So in other words, when a system evolves where some standard dictates what the value of a patent or a trademark is, that is when you can easily convince the CXO, CEO, or CFO that this is the value of your patents. But in the absence of such a measure or a standard where you can, for a valuation metric or a standard, you have to come up with your own metrics. So the 4 blocks that I showed earlier, I'll take the exclusivity block as an example. If you take that block and you can go to marketing and say, if you were to sell this product without this patent, without this technology and this protection, what would be your sales? They can actually they have a pretty good idea, actually. You would be surprised at how good an idea they have of what the value of the technology, of a particular technology, is in their sales numbers. Once you get that number, they also actually know how much they can sell it for without a particular patent. So for example, and this was something that has been calculated and proven, at least within Philips, we had a shaver, a 3-headed shaver that you would have seen, those rotary shavers. A certain type of patent protection ran out, and the IP department had actually predicted what the drop in revenues would be, not in sales, but in revenues. And that was almost on the dot. In other words, we were able to calculate how much they could actually charge as an additional amount for that patent, for the protected technology. So I think if you can put these numbers together, then you can actually convince a CFO or a CEO that it's an investment. Of course, where in times of cash crunch, maybe they won't look at it the same way. But I think today, from what I've seen, a lot of CEOs actually see this as an investment. They continue to see it as an investment. In fact, even I think it was during recession time, I think it was the head of GE who said, let's continue to invest. Or maybe it's Philips, I don't remember, but they said, let's continue to invest in innovation and IP protection so that this recession will disappear in 5 years. We want to be prepared when the market takes off again with new innovation that is protected. So actually, if you get such a CEO, then your job is easy. You don't have to convince anyone. But if you get a CEO or a CFO that looks at it as cost, then I think the evaluation methodologies that we mentioned earlier and meaningful methodologies would be the way to convince them that it's an investment. And of course, having 1 or 2 proof points along the way doesn't hurt.
Thank you. Dr. Seshan.
No, I completely agree. And when arguing for investing in innovation initiatives, it's based on assumptions. Everything is uncertain. You have guesstimates. There are no figures. The only figures, if you have figures, the only thing you know about the figures is that they are wrong. But I believe you can based on your assumptions about innovation opportunities, if you say, well, what happens if we protect this? What happens if we don't protect it? You can make that assessment on the potential value for all the involved stakeholders. So you can actually do that. And it's a perspective often forgotten. So how does the potential value change if you just ask yourself, what happens if we protect it? What happens if we're not protecting it? And are you willing to walk away from that opportunity? That would be the question. Not the cost of it, but the lost opportunity, so to speak.
Yeah, and sorry, one more point, Gunnar, and thank you. I agree with you completely. The other point is sometimes a CEO might be right. Let's say that you take the name Philips or you take a GE or whatever, and you're selling it as a Philips product or a Signify product. Does it really make sense to have just the Philips name there? Or does it also add value to say it's a Philips champion or a Philips something else? Maybe that champion or something else has no value. Maybe they're right. So it's in that case, it's better to, as you say, walk away. In this case, get rid of it and just retain the Philips name, because that is the bulk of your value. And you can actually save cost without losing the value.
Right. But in that case, you need the holistic view that you emphasize. Yeah.
Indeed. That's what, indeed.
Thank you very much. Very interesting and refreshing discussion today. I think we have reached almost the close of 90 minutes. I would like to thank Dr. Viswanathan Seshan for taking time and joining us on this webinar, And thank you, Mr. Gunnar. As always, thank you very much for sharing your perspectives on ISO standards and enlightening us about the new standard that's coming up and how we can utilize them in the area of intellectual property rights. So closing, this CXO forum of systematic innovation management webinars are scheduled every second Wednesday of the month. The next webinar will be on the 13th of December 2023. So thank you all for joining, and namaste.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
No.